Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and in this video I'm going to share with you my first impressions and general thoughts about the Elder Scrolls Oblivion Remaster. I'm a big fan of Oblivion. In fact, due to its faction and side quests, it's my favorite Elder Scrolls game, and so I have some opinions regarding the remaster. First and foremost though, I do want to say that in some ways, I appreciate the fact that we have this remaster, and I hope it does well enough for Bethesda to consider maybe a remake of Morrowind, or to contract Obsidian to make a remaster of New Vegas, that kind of thing. And in general, I think it would be a positive shift for the games industry if we show these companies, especially the money people within them, that there is absolutely a lot of interest in older games or games with so-called outdated design. My overall impression of the remaster is mixed. I think it has a lot of potential. The bones, the structure is there, but there's still issues to fix. The game is at the moment a bit too buggy and messy, even for a Bethesda game. It just doesn't really deliver the level of quality that I expected, and some of the bugs just make the experience far worse than original Oblivion. There are also a few changes I think are completely unacceptable, but we'll get to those later. Before I get into all the details, I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to my members who help keep this channel running. I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider joining the channel as a member to support me and unlock perks like early access to videos. Joining is very much appreciated, but not required. I am always thankful, even if you just take the time to like the video and maybe leave a comment. Back to Oblivion. I'll go through my impressions of the remaster, the good, the bad, and finally, the ugly, or more accurately, the things that have both good and bad aspects, which kind of make them more disappointing because you can see what the intent was and it just falls short of the mark. First, the good. Mostly, the visuals are amazing. The characters are higher quality while still retaining the charm and sometimes goofiness of the original. You can still make weird characters in the character creator. A lot of NPCs look very similar to their original counterparts. The armors, weapons, clothes, clutter items, and so on look good, like they fit within Oblivion, but have been updated to be higher resolution, and sometimes a bit different than the original designs. Not different in a bad way though. I really loved the interiors of Aelid ruins, forts, houses, and all other man-made structures. I'll explain later in the bad section why I'm putting an emphasis on man-made. The Aelid ruins in particular stole the show so far. They look stunning. I love them in OG Oblivion too, but they really are beautiful in the remaster. The UI is a huge highlight for me. I love the UI in the original, and I was afraid that they would just completely scrap it and make a Skyrim-like super simplified and way too modern looking UI for this remaster. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that they kept so much of the fantasy look and charm of the original. The painted icons are still there, the journal or page background is present, and really the only thing they've changed is that they've made the UI easier to navigate, which is absolutely a good thing. I will admit that even as a fan of Oblivion, the UI navigation wasn't exactly great. The leveling system has been reworked to kind of combine Oblivion and Skyrim in a way that works really well for me. You don't have to min-max your level ups anymore, you just get 12 points to allocate however you want, with a maximum of 5 points you can allocate per attribute, and luck is a special case where it costs 4 points to increase the attribute by 1, so that they could keep this attribute much harder to level up, just like in the original. You may know, if you've followed me for longer, that I'm not a min-maxer. I just don't enjoy doing it because I'm far more interested in role-playing and feeling immersed in RPGs than being overpowered and mowing everything down. So this change suits me perfectly. I personally didn't have issues with Oblivion's level scaling because none of my characters ever went past level 25, and I generally played on the difficulty slider set to the middle, so nothing felt particularly hard. But I have definitely heard many people complaining about the enemies becoming huge damage sponges at higher levels, and possibly being much more difficult to defeat if you didn't level up in an optimal way. So I'm very happy that the devs solved these issues by changing how the level up system works, as well as probably changing the level scaling as well. I haven't played enough to be able to tell how the level scaling feels on adept difficulty quite yet, just level 5 at the moment, but I will discuss this in more detail in my full review that will come sometime later. Another small but good thing I want to mention is the fact that whenever you hover over an item you can pick up, it gets highlighted with a white outline around it. I really like this because sometimes in these games, especially in dark areas like caves, forts, tombs, ruins, and so on, you can have trouble telling what exactly you're hovering over, even if you do get the text to show up. This to me seems like a very nice accessibility addition, and I personally like it. However, I have heard some people complaining about it and wishing that it could be turned off in the settings, I think that's a great idea since it's a very noticeable change from the original. It would make perfect sense for this to be an option you can toggle on or off in the settings. Hopefully the devs will listen to player feedback and implement it, but even if they don't, I'd say give it an hour or two and you'll probably get used to it even if at first you don't like it. Moving on to the bad. The worst thing by far is that there are a lot of bugs. In general, crashes. I even had one during the live stream of my first few hours of playing the game. Really bad performance, so much so that I had to keep fiddling with my graphics settings because my computer kept heating up and the fans were so loud, it was like a rocket taking off in my living room. I understand this can be the case with UE5 games, although I haven't had anything like this happen with Avowed or Hogwarts Legacy, so I think it's just a matter of performance optimization that the devs clearly haven't focused on enough. But as long as the game is overall playable, I don't mind a few crashes or having to lower my graphics settings for performance. What I do mind are bugs that affect the gameplay experience. In particular, I'm referring to combat here. I can't even put it in the good and bad category because I can't really tell whether it would be good due to the enemy AI being incredibly unresponsive or otherwise acting stupidly. I've had enemies just completely ignore me while I was running towards them or standing just a few feet away from them for several seconds until finally reacting and getting into combat mode. I've had ranged enemies not notice me and then when they finally noticed me, walk away a few steps and only afterwards turn around and shoot me. Of course, my speed was much higher than theirs, so walking away to get more range was not really a smart move seeing as I could catch up to them and then they'd have even less shots to kill me with. The entire enemy AI feels janky and unfinished, and I don't really understand why. If they're using the original Oblivion underneath it all, enemies were decently responsive in that one. They really just needed to add some better impact effects and reactions and solve the level scaling. I don't know what they tried to tweak in the enemy AI, but they kind of broke it. I was playing on Adept difficulty and it felt far too easy because of these issues. I only almost died a couple of times when I wasn't paying attention to my HP because I was talking on stream, and the only enemies that felt slightly challenging were ones who could heal themselves. Otherwise, most enemies just died in a couple of hits. I understand that the early levels are easier and all, but I don't think that means you should be able to walk up to enemies without them reacting to you at all for a few seconds. So this is really a major aspect of the game that just makes the game not very fun to play. The impact effects and hit reactions have been improved. It no longer feels like you're hitting things with a pool noodle. Your weapon does have some weight, and enemies also react to being hit, but I can't enjoy these improvements when there's such a glaring issue that makes combat play in a way it's not supposed to. Another terrible gameplay related thing is the map for interior levels. For some reason, if you're in an interior and open up the map, the world map is what shows up instead of the local map of the level. The only way you can get to the local map is by zooming in all the way to the plus sign, which finally changes the map to the correct one. But even worse, this zoom doesn't remain active while you're in the dungeon, so you have to zoom in every single time you want to look at the map of the interior. And if you've played Oblivion before, you know that this is something you usually do multiple times while in a more complex dungeon like an Ayleid ruin or a fort or something that has multiple cells. I don't know what the devs were thinking. Both Oblivion and Skyrim have local maps that you can access very easily. This local map issue needs to be fixed as soon as possible, otherwise it feels extremely tedious to go into any of these larger interior levels. I'm already fed up with it after exploring just a few such levels. It's unacceptable. The last thing I'd mention as a negative is that the controls can be unresponsive at times and also feel a bit awkward. I've had multiple situations where I was in combat and tried to either swing my sword or cast a spell, and my character did nothing instead. The game didn't respond to my inputs for a second or two and then seemingly regained responsiveness. This is yet another thing that is unacceptable for a game this big and this popular. How did they mess it up so badly that the game doesn't properly respond in a timely manner to my inputs? In terms of the awkwardness of the controls, I had hoped that they would make casting magic a bit more like it is in Skyrim, where you can equip it to a hand and then use a mouse button to cast a spell. Would have been totally fine if you can only equip it in the left hand and cast a spell just like you do in Oblivion, but the spell equipping and casting part is fairly awkward and unintuitive. This was definitely an area that could have been improved. Since they already touched combat by changing things for melee and ranged, blocking, dodging, and stamina and so on, they could have absolutely improved the experience of spellcasting. It's fine, I can't say it's the worst thing ever since it's just like original Oblivion, but it's not good either. And it's made worse by the responsiveness issue. Thankfully, I think it's going to be a lot better if they can fix the enemy AI and responsiveness of the game. so the awkwardness of magic inputs should just go back to original Oblivion levels. Finally, let's talk about the aspects of the game that are both good and bad at the same time, which I'm calling the ugly because in some cases they're more disappointing than the straight up bad elements. I have to mention right away the new voice acting they added into the game. Some extremely minor NPCs that aren't memorable have new voices, and it's fine. You'll hear some new combat barks or battle cries, maybe some lines of dialogue that are either new or said differently by a new voice actor, and that's all nice and dandy until you reach Cheydinhal and you go to one of your favorite NPCs, Aldos Othran. You know, the Cliff Racer song guy.
Flying, flying in the sky, Cliff Racer flies so high, flying.
And you find him and wait until 12 PM, then see him drinking a bunch of invisible drinks instead of singing, then wait again until 4 PM when he finally moves to the other bridge and starts singing like this.
Flying, flying in the sky. But it got... Someone's been murdered!
Now, I will pardon you if you haven't played Oblivion before and haven't come across this guy or the meme song called the Cliff Racer song. The link to it will be down in the description. But this guy, Aldos Othran, is iconic to Oblivion. If you ask me to tell you what first comes to mind when I hear Oblivion, it will always be three things. Aldos's Cliff Racer song, Ulrich Leyland's
I don't know you and I don't care to know you. Get out of my way before I have you slapped in irons.
And finally, the adoring fans,
By Azura, by Azura, by Azura, it's the grand champion. I can't believe it's you standing here next to me.
I cannot explain to you how disappointing and depressing it was to hear this absolutely pathetic excuse of a voice performance coming out of Aldos Othran's mouth. I was so upset that I closed the game, listened to the Cliff Racer song to cleanse my ears of that disaster, and then immediately started trying to mod the game to override those voice lines with the original ones. I wasn't able to do it even though I tried for a few hours, but I genuinely tried to fix it myself. That's how terrible it was for me. I understand that not everyone will feel so strongly about the voice acting as I do, but for me these voice lines are iconic and an absolutely integral part of Oblivion. Without these specific voice actors saying these lines in this specific way, the game just doesn't feel like Oblivion. Craig Seckler did such a great job voicing Aldos, the adoring fan, and so many other elves in the game. I just don't understand why you would replace his original voice lines with someone else's, especially with such low energy acting. Oblivion voice lines are some of the most memorable in the series, and frankly I consider the limited amount of voice actors in Elder Scrolls games to be a feature, not a bug. It's actually really fun to hear the same voice actors over and over. They start feeling familiar, comfortable, and it's like they imbue the game with their voices so much so that their voices feel like they have to be there, that they're part of the game's DNA. So I am pleading with either the devs or modders who know what they're doing better than I do to please revert to Craig Seckler's original recordings. And frankly, I would love to have the option to toggle all the voice lines to their original versions because I just don't enjoy hearing new voices for NPCs I already associate with a particular voice actor. Anyway, moving on to the second thing that's both good and bad, the natural environments. They look nice and realistic, but that's not really what I want out of a very strongly fantastical game like Oblivion. The natural assets like rocks, cave walls, trees, bushes, and so on look a bit too realistic and don't mesh well with Oblivion's vibes. They also have that Unreal Engine 5 look to them, which I hadn't realized was such a noticeable thing until I played more games developed in UE5. There's a certain softness and slight dampness to all the UE5 3D models and textures. I don't know what it is, I don't really have knowledge of modeling or texturing, but it's very noticeable once you've seen it in a few different games like Avowed, Hogwarts Legacy, Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden, Black Myth Wukong, and so on, and now Oblivion. I didn't mind this look in Hogwarts Legacy, for example, because it kind of felt like it fit the whimsical fantasy film vibes of the game. Plus, it mostly had teenager characters and only some adults, so the weird face textures kind of worked. That's why it also works for the faces and character and creature models in the Oblivion Remaster, because it makes them look a bit weird and goofy, which helps retain the feel of the original. but unfortunately, the natural environments end up looking really out of place when compared to everything else. It's not just the models and textures themselves though, it's also the lighting and color balance. They really wanted to emphasize all the changing weather effects and sunlight and all that, and ended up with a color balance that looks too yellow, brown, and muted. There's already a bunch of shader presets on Nexus mods that make the game look more vibrant, more similar to the original, so it's not just me who has an issue with how the environments look like, in particular in the open world. The shaders, or color balance, or whatever, are something that can be very easily fixed on the dev side though, so I'm hoping they'll adjust it on their end. I personally don't like using reshade, so I'd prefer the game to just look good on its own. But the textures and general hyper-realistic and UE5-like look of the natural environment isn't something that can be fixed unfortunately, so that will remain a negative in my book. Finally, the last thing I consider ugly, the character creator in terms of race and origin selection. I think the racial bonuses are unbalanced, and I understand that you can't make anything perfectly balanced, but some races only have one major power that they can use once a day and no other passive bonuses, whereas other races have a ton of passive bonuses and maybe also a minor power they can use multiple times. While the Orc's Berserker Rage is powerful, as someone who isn't a min-maxer who would abuse that power by resting for a day whenever I need it, I would like to have some other racial bonuses as an orc too. The racial bonuses are not that bad though, at least not that bad when you compare them with the origin traits. I really appreciate that they added this option to choose one of two origins for your character based on their race, their culture, relating to how they grew up. It's a very cool idea, and there are even a few origin traits that you get that make sense from a lore perspective and add more flavor to your character, but most of the origin traits are extremely basic, repetitive between the different races, and not necessarily adding any flavor or lore immersion. The problem with these origins is the contrast between the ones that are really nice and the ones that are so basic that by comparison they look very lame. For example, I really like the Argonian's Amnesia origin, which increases your agility and speed due to being on the run from Dunmer slavers. Thornmarsh is a bit weird because it says you dabbled in magic in order to survive in the wilds, but at least it still paints an interesting picture of your character's background. But in comparison, the Breton origins are quite shitty. High Rock increases your speed because you traveled a lot between the different cities in the province. And Sistrus is even worse because it gives you strength, saying that you helped merchants for money by carrying their goods. It also says you learned from their adventures, but instead of giving you a boost to your personality, it decides strength is the bonus you should get. Bretons are good at magic, and yet neither origin does anything to enhance a particular kind of magic, or at least something interesting that sounds more lore appropriate and immersive than you, the Breton, hauled merchant crates so you got strong. The Dark Elf is fine enough and makes sense lore-wise, but the High Elf bonuses, and more importantly the reasons for them, are dumb. Speed in particular is just such a common bonus for multiple races, and I don't really understand why. Not going to go through all of them, but a lot tend to get very boring bonuses to endurance, strength, or speed, without giving very compelling or immersive reasons that make sense for your character's race and culture. And still in character creation, as part of choosing these things, there is also the unfortunate situation of a bug. A pretty major one at that, which switches two bonuses around. If you want to play as a Redguard, you should get increased strength if you choose the Alakir Desert origin, and increased personality if you choose the Dragontail Mountains origin. You get exactly the opposite, personality for the desert and strength for the mountains. I mentioned this bug here as the last thing in my ugly category because I want to talk a bit about the state of the game. It feels unfinished, unpolished, it has too many bugs, and not the fun Bethesda kind of bugs, but frustrating ones instead. And at some point, these bugs pile up and make the game start to feel like it's lower quality, like not enough effort or care was put into it. Even though I can see the skeleton of the game, I can see the intention and the potential, the level of polish isn't there. There definitely wasn't enough QA testing, and I don't think this remaster was actually ready to be released so early. But I think Bethesda and Virtuos wanted to take advantage of the buzz that all the leaks and rumors generated and release the game while the hype was at its highest, even if the game wasn't quite ready. In my video discussing my concerns about this remaster before it got confirmed and shadow dropped, I mentioned that one of my theories regarding why none of the people involved in the remaster had said anything in response to the leaks was that the game wasn't in a good enough state to talk about it or release it, and that they probably didn't feel as confident that the game would be that well received and perform well in terms of sales, so they didn't want to spend money on marketing if that marketing investment wasn't going to pay itself back. I still think that this was the initial reason why Bethesda didn't do their usual aggressive marketing strategy. They weren't sure how well a remaster would do, and especially considering the fact that Oblivion has a particular style to it, a particular charm, and a certain audience of fans who still play it to this day who are perhaps more difficult to please. And if the game still has quite a significant number of bugs and performance issues, I don't think it was supposed to launch now. But they released it anyway because the hype was high, not a lot of other RPGs launched around this time to compete against, and maybe they also wanted to release it ahead of Oblivion, which is also releasing this year, since they know that a lot of Oblivion fans would absolutely choose Oblivion over this remaster, not just because it's free, but because it's made by fans, for fans, instead of by professional game devs literally contracted to make a game for profit. I'm not saying that the devs themselves aren't fans of Oblivion, I'm sure most of them are, but it's different when you're creating a product that's supposed to pay the salaries and the bills. And if anyone says, well, it's fine because they can just fix it with patches later, or even worse, the modders will fix the game, I don't think that's a nice way of looking at the games industry. I don't want to be sold a broken game or a game with issues that make the experience of playing it frustrating, and to be told that I should just wait for some months or a year or who knows how long for either the devs or the modders to fix it. It's totally fine for there to be some bugs, no game is ever 100% bug-free, but I want to have a good experience overall, and not feel like I was kind of cheated out of my money by people who didn't want to be in full development for another year and wanted to get their product out of the door faster to get sales. In conclusion, I don't know how to feel towards the Oblivion Remaster just yet. Do I like the visuals? Kind of. Do I like the combat? Not really, it's just too buggy. Do I like the UI? Mostly yes, though there is that local map issue. Do I like the new voice lines? Not at all. In fact, I hate them. I never really had much of an issue playing Oblivion on newer hardware. I don't mind the outdated visuals. I play Oblivion completely unmodded every time and enjoy it. So this remaster wasn't really made for someone like me who just wanted the experience of Oblivion to be enhanced but otherwise keeping the soul of the game intact. And while I appreciate a lot about it, I don't quite understand why it exists. As I said, Oblivion is still very much playable and enjoyable today. It has a huge amount of mods if you're interested in that kind of thing. If there was a game that needed a remaster, and far more likely a remake, it would be Morrowind. That one is difficult to play nowadays unless you're using something like OpenMW. The skill-based hit chance gives a lot of players, especially newer ones, a headache and makes the game much harder for them, so they're more likely to give up on it. And Morrowind has really cool lore and a unique atmosphere. It absolutely deserves to be experienced by more people and would greatly benefit from a remake, or even just half remake, half remaster situation like we have here with Oblivion. I want to like this remaster. I do, because overall it does make a 20-year-old game more accessible to younger players who are maybe put off the original's graphics. And if this remaster is successful, maybe we'll get that Morrowind remake or remaster too, because it will prove to Bethesda that people are interested in this thing. Maybe other older classics are going to get the same treatment too. Maybe the money people from game companies are going to finally understand that yes, indeed, gamers do want to play interesting single-player games that may be a bit clunky or difficult or not the best looking, so maybe they change their approach and stop trying to make all those live service games with MTX and whatnot, and let devs actually make the games they want to make. But the thing is that right now, I can't really recommend this game. Even if you are an Oblivion fan, there's a lot of things that are disappointing at the moment, so at the very least I urge you to wait for at least a month or maybe more for the major bugs to be fixed. And frankly, you'll probably have a better time playing Oblivion, at least based on the current state of the Oblivion Remaster. For my full review, I think I'm going to wait for a few major patches, if such patches will happen, because right now my review would be far too negative and I very much hope that in the future that will no longer be the case. Until then, these have been my initial thoughts and impressions of the Oblivion Remaster. It's got a lot of potential, but it needs a whole lot of work. What do you think about the remaster? Have you gotten to play it yet? Did you encounter a lot of bugs like I did, or maybe had a nicer, less buggy experience? Do you like the visuals? I'm really curious to know your thoughts, whether you're a new person who's never played Oblivion before, or an Oblivion fan or veteran. How does this version of Oblivion stack up against the original for you, or how does it stack up against something like Skyrim or another modern RPG you enjoy? Let me know down below. If you're looking forward to more videos about RPGs and other games I like, do remember to subscribe and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. They really help. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.